Okay, so you want to own a bank? Not just have an account at one. You want the building, the vault, the logo on the side of the skyscraper, the right to print money out of thin air with a regulator's blessing on the wall. Because here's what they don't teach you in business school. A bank is the only legal business on earth that can lend out $10 for every $1 it actually has. It's the closest thing to a money printer the real economy has ever permitted. And yet, every few years, one of them blows up so spectacularly, it almost takes the entire global economy down with it. Lehman Brothers, 158 years old, killed in a single weekend. Silicon Valley Bank, $209 billion in assets, dead in 48 hours. Credit Suisse, founded in 1856, gone in a Sunday night phone call. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the most profitable business model ever invented is also one of the fastest ways to lose everything you own. Why the smartest, best-funded operators on the planet still go bust running these things. And why owning a bank is closer to running a nuclear reactor than running a business. Let's open the books. The first question is the simplest. How much does a bank actually cost? And the answer depends entirely on which kind of bank you want, in which country, and how patient your lawyer is. Let's start at the cheap end. To open a brand new community bank in the United States, the FDIC requires somewhere between $10 and $30 million in startup capital. That gets you a single branch, a vault, maybe 40 employees, and a license to take deposits in one zip code. Sounds doable, until you find out that's only the capital requirement. Add another $5 to $10 million for compliance software, core banking systems, security infrastructure, and the army of consultants you'll need just to file your charter application. That application alone takes 12 to 18 months and reads like a 500-page novel about your personal finances, your competitors, your hiring plans, and exactly how you intend to not commit fraud. Now go up one tier. A regional bank with 20 branches across 3 states? You're looking at $100 to $300 million just to open the doors. Want to buy one that already exists? The average US community bank in 2024 sold for around 1.4 times its book value, which for a mid-size regional means a price tag starting at $500 million. And then there are the giants. JP Morgan Chase has a market capitalization north of $700 billion. Buying it is not a transaction. It's an act of war, but the US isn't the only option. Before we continue, tell us which country you're watching from. I am curious to know. In Switzerland, a private banking license starts at 10 million Swiss francs in regulatory capital. Plus, you'll need to convince the Swiss financial regulator that you're the kind of person who won't embarrass them in front of the German press. The Cayman Islands will sell you a Class B offshore bank charter for under $1 million. But you can't take deposits from Cayman residents. You're basically buying a shell for moving other people's money around in the dark. Try China, and you'll find that foreign individuals cannot own a controlling stake in any domestic bank. Full stop. The rules are designed to keep Chinese banks Chinese. India is even tighter. The Reserve Bank of India has issued exactly 2 new universal banking licenses in the last decade. You're not buying access to a market. You're praying for permission to compete in one. Now here's where it gets interesting. Because most people think a bank makes money by holding your savings and lending out the difference. That's only the surface. The real engine is something called the net interest margin. You take in deposits at 1%, you lend them out at 6%. That 5-point spread, multiplied by billions of dollars sitting in checking accounts, is where the money lives. But the deeper trick is the leverage. When you deposit $1,000 at a bank, the bank does not lock it in a vault. By law in the US, it can lend out roughly $900 of it. The borrower then deposits that $900 somewhere, which lets that bank lend out $810. And on and on. This is called fractional reserve banking, and it means a single $1,000 deposit can generate close to $10,000 of new money in the economy. The bank earns interest on every dollar of that chain. You are not a customer. You are the raw material. Then comes the fee layer: overdraft fees, wire fees, ATM fees, monthly maintenance fees, foreign exchange spreads, origination fees on every mortgage, late fees on every credit card. JP Morgan alone has collected over $1 billion in overdraft fees in a single year. That's pure profit, stacked on top of the interest spread. And at the very top of the pyramid, the investment banks add a third revenue stream: advisory fees on every merger, underwriting fees on every IPO, trading desk profits, derivatives, spreads. Goldman Sachs makes more money in trading floor algorithms than most countries make in tax revenue. So the business model is layered: interest spread on the bottom, fees in the middle, trading and advisory on top. Each layer compounds the one below it, and the more deposits you control, the more leverage you have to play with. This is why every bank on the planet spends its entire existence trying to grow deposits. Not because they need your $200 in checking, because every dollar you give them lets them manufacture 10 more out of nothing. Sounds perfect, right? Well, not exactly. Because before you collect a single dollar of net interest margin, you have to survive the most expensive operating environment in the business world. Start with compliance. A community bank with $1 billion in assets typically spends $7 to $10 million a year just on compliance staff and software. That number doubles every time a regulator changes a rule, and they change rules constantly. After the 2008 crisis, the Dodd-Frank Act triggered more than 22,000 pages of new regulation across the federal banking system. Now multiply that by every state regulator, every international banking accord, every anti-money laundering directive, every consumer protection bureau, and you'll start to understand why most banks now employ more lawyers than loan officers. Then there's capital itself. Regulators require you to hold a percentage of your loans in reserve. Capital you cannot lend, cannot invest, cannot touch. For a typical US bank, that's roughly 8 to 12% of all risk-weighted assets, sitting on your balance sheet doing nothing. FDIC insurance costs banks billions per year collectively, and the bill rises every time another bank fails, which means the survivors keep paying for the dead. Cybersecurity is its own war zone. Banks are the #1 target for organized cybercrime on Earth. JP Morgan spends over $600 million a year on cybersecurity alone, employs more than 3,000 security professionals, and still gets attacked tens of thousands of times per day. Then there's litigation. Wells Fargo paid $3 billion in 2020 to settle a single fake account scandal. Bank of America has paid over $76 billion in legal fines since 2008. Deutsche Bank has been fined so many times in the last decade, it became a running joke at central banks. And underneath all of that is the silent killer: interest rate risk. The bank borrows short-term, your checking deposits, at 1%. It lends long-term, a 30-year mortgage, at 6%. As long as short rates stay low, you keep 5 points on the spread. But the moment a central bank raises rates, your funding costs explode, while your loan income stays frozen. The whole model inverts overnight, which brings us to the graveyard. In March 2023, Silicon Valley Bank, the 16th largest bank in America with $209 billion in assets, collapsed in 48 hours. They had taken billions of dollars in tech deposits and parked the money in long-term treasury bonds. When the Fed raised rates, those bonds lost value. Customers heard whispers, opened their phones, and pulled $42 billion out in a single day. The bank was dead by sunrise. 2 days later, Signature Bank in New York followed. A week after that, First Republic, with $233 billion in assets, was seized and sold to JP Morgan in a fire sale. 3 of the largest bank failures in American history happened inside 60 days. Now go back to 2008. Lehman Brothers, founded in 1850, survived the Civil War, 2 World Wars, and the Great Depression. Killed in one weekend by mortgage exposure. $691 billion in assets vaporized. Largest bankruptcy in human history. Washington Mutual, $307 billion in assets, gone the same year. Bear Stearns, swallowed by JP Morgan for $2 a share, a price so humiliating that the deal had to be quietly renegotiated days later, just to keep the senior executives from setting their own building on fire. In 2023, Credit Suisse, 167 years old, the second largest Swiss bank on earth, was forced into a shotgun marriage with rival UBS over a single weekend by Swiss regulators. The bank that survived 2 world wars could not survive its own risk department. And these are just the famous ones. Since the year 2000, the United States alone has logged over 560 bank failures. The pattern is always the same. The math worked perfectly, until one assumption broke. And when an assumption breaks at a leveraged institution, you don't get a slow decline. You get a 48-hour evaporation event. So, after all of that, what does this business actually pay? Let's run the numbers. Scenario 1. A small US community bank with $500 million in assets. After interest income, fees, compliance, salaries, taxes, and reserves, your net income lands around $5 to $8 million a year. Return on equity, roughly 8 to 12%. Comparable to a decent rental portfolio, except with 1,000 times the regulatory headache. Scenario 2. A regional bank with $20 billion in assets. Net income in a good year, $200 to $300 million. Return on equity climbs to 13 to 15%. Now you're in the game. Your stock trades publicly, your name goes on stadiums, your CEO makes $15 million a year and complains it isn't enough. Scenario 3. The Giants. JP Morgan Chase posted a net profit of $58 billion in 2024. That's more than the GDP of most countries on Earth. Jamie Dimon's personal compensation, $36 million. The bank's market value has tripled since 2020. And then, there is the most patient version of the trade. Warren Buffett figured out decades ago that you do not have to operate a bank to profit from one. You just have to own enough of it. Berkshire Hathaway has held stakes in Bank of America, American Express, and Wells Fargo for so long that a few billion of initial investment has compounded into more than $40 billion of current value, with billions more paid out in dividends along the way. No charter application, no compliance department, no 3 a.m. phone call from a regulator. He just bought the seats nobody could fire him from. So here is the final math of this entire industry. The bigger the bank, the more the leverage compounds in your favor. The smaller the bank, the more every shock can kill you. And the safest seat in the whole game isn't running a bank at all. It's owning a slice of someone else's. Because here is the contradiction at the heart of this business. A bank generates more money per employee than almost any company on earth. It also fails more often than restaurants, gets sued more often than hospitals, and lives under the constant gun of regulators who can wipe out your equity by signing a single letter on a Friday afternoon at 5 p.m. In this industry, surviving is more important than winning. The vault is always full. The question is whether you'll still be standing next to it when the doors open Monday morning.